Hello, everyone. I'm R. Blank, and welcome to another episode of the Healthier Tech Podcast, the podcast about a healthier approach to living alongside modern technology. So today we're going to welcome Cathy Cooke to the podcast. Cathy is pretty great. She's a certified holistic nutritionist, a certified building biologist, and a certified EMF radiation specialist. That's a lot of certifications. And it's a really great combination for the topic we're going to cover today, which is using nutrition to protect against damage from EMF.
Open up that spice cabinet and use your spices. Use them liberally. Don't be afraid to add cumin and rosemary and paprika, turmeric, all of these beautiful spices, ginger, nutmeg, cinnamon. These are all very, very antioxidant rich.
Cathy is a consultant. She has her own shop at wholehomeandbodyhealth.com. She's also actually on the SYB team as our in-house EMF specialist, and she's available to book remote consulting sessions from anywhere in the world on my website at shieldyourbody.com. Cathy has a really powerful story to tell because her expertise comes from her own necessity. She learned all this stuff because she had to find ways to improve her own health, and now she so generously shares that knowledge with the community. And in addition to talking about nutritional defense for EMF, we're also going to cover the condition that so many people have of experiencing sensitivity and negative health reactions to levels of EMF that a lot of us don't feel and that are present kind of everywhere. Before we begin, a brief word. This podcast is brought to you by my company, Shield Your Body, where it is our mission to help make technology safer for you and your loved ones to enjoy. Inspired by the life's work of my father, Dr. Martin Blank, one of the world's leading EMF scientists, I founded Shield Your Body in 2012. And we provide a ton of great and free resources for you to learn all about EMF radiation, like articles, ebooks, webinars, videos, and this podcast. And we also have a world-class catalog of laboratory-tested EMF and 5G protection products. From our phone pouch and laptop pad, all the way up to our bed canopy, all of our shielding products are laboratory-tested and include a lifetime warranty. Learn more about our products, why we have hundreds of thousands of satisfied customers around the world at ShieldYourBody.com. That's ShieldYourBody, all one word, .com. And use promo code POD to save 15% on your first order with free shipping throughout North America and Europe. Okay, I'm really excited for this. Let's dive in. Welcome, Cathy. It's a real pleasure to have you here on our podcast.
Likewise, I'm delighted to be here and to be speaking about such an important topic with you, and just really excited to have a good conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. So as a lot of our listeners know, you and I know each other pretty well. We've been working together for a while. But for those who don't, could you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, and in particular, how you ended up with this dual focus on EMF and nutrition?
Yeah. So I'm a holistic nutritionist, and I've been doing that, since about 2013 or so. And I got into the field because of nutrition and health, because I have had chronic health conditions since I was 12 years old, since I was bit by a tick in Missouri on a field trip. And ever since then, I had all of these weird, strange, mysterious illnesses. And so I was researching everything about health that I could get my hands on for a couple of decades, until I finally decided I'm going to make a career out of it because I knew so much. And so I became a nutritionist certified in 2014. But as I was working on my own health issues, and I was doing everything right, and I had access to fantastic healthcare practitioners, and I really had everything dialed in, I was still having these lingering health symptoms. And primarily it was severe, very, very severe insomnia, tinnitus or ringing in the ears, and some anxiety. And I just couldn't get a handle on it no matter what I did. However, the topic of EMFs kept coming up for me. It was really kind of just over my head, and really hard for me to take seriously, because it's not something you can see. It's invisible. You can't hear it or smell it or taste it or see it. But in my desperation, after about a 2-week period of not sleeping more than 1 or 2 hours a night, each night, I just said, okay, I got to give this EMF thing a try. And so I unplugged my Wi-Fi router for a week, and I turned off my phone and put it in a drawer for a week just to see what would happen. And lo and behold, it was completely life-changing, and my sleep got dramatically better, and my tinnitus went away in about 3 days. And it was unbelievably profound. And so from that point on, I knew that if I was going to continue to help my clients in their health struggles, I had to know everything there was to know about this environmental piece of it. So I just decided right there, I'm going all in, and I'm going to enroll with the Building Biology Institute, and I became certified in 2018.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. So for those who don't know, we discussed the Building Biology Institute at greater length in another episode this season. Cathy, you talk about, the story you just told me, it's pretty remarkable, the results you saw just by taking a few of those EMF mitigation steps. And I know today we're going to talk a lot about nutrition, but I did want to start off by talking about this level of sensitivity to EMF exposure that I think, based on what you were saying, you were demonstrating, and more broadly, this topic of electrohypersensitivity. So could you please tell our listeners what electrohypersensitivity, or EHS, what it is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So electrohypersensitivity is one of the terms that has kind of more or less arbitrarily been given to people who are affected by our electromagnetic environment, which could be, radio frequency, things like Wi-Fi or cell phones or fitness trackers, but it's also the wiring in our walls, power lines, all of the other electrical components that we're surrounded with. And there's actually some controversy around the term electrohypersensitivity, that putting that word hyper in there kind of does a disservice to the people who have the most symptoms, because they feel like, we know from what the science says that all of us are affected by these fields no matter what. We know that there is biological cellular impact no matter what. So to say that some people are hypersensitive doesn't really honor their experience there, because it's, saying that they're different than everybody else, when in fact they aren't. It's just that for whatever reason, they may have some underlying issues that makes them more aware of their electromagnetic environment, and they have more symptoms, more acute or severe or noticeable symptoms than other people do. So it's this loose term that's been given to people that are considered to have some of the more severe noticeable symptoms. And I might say that some people may be reacting in the same way. They've just not made the connection between their symptoms and the electromagnetic environment. So it's not, I know that's not a really great answer, but it's basically just saying that these people are having, a hard time living in our electrified world.
No, that is a good answer. So, and it brings me to a bunch of different questions. But I guess to start, you describe a range of symptoms. I know in your own personal experience, you described sleep disruption. You described tinnitus or tinnitus. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce that word. But what? And I know that there can be a wide variety of symptom expression in people with these reactions. But what are some of the more common ones that you've come across? The symptoms.
Well, like with my experience, insomnia, I would say, is one of the biggest. Even with people who think they sleep well, when I encourage them to turn their phone off at night or turn their Wi-Fi off at night, I almost always hear them say, wow, I had no idea my sleep wasn't that great until I took these measures, and now I'm sleeping so much better. So disrupted sleep is definitely big. One of the biggest. I would say tinnitus, because itis is, inflammation. You say bursitis or other itises, right? So I'm going to say tinnitus. That's also pretty common. Headaches are very common. And I would say an extremely common yet underappreciated symptom is anxiety. Anxiety and depression and irritability, those kind of all go together. And the frustrating thing about that for me is that I know so many people in my life who are on anxiety medications or medications for depression, but this area has never been approached with them. And so, and I have seen many people, if they have better hygiene around their EMF environment, that the anxiety and depression goes away. And I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, absolutely not. But I think that we could really save ourselves a lot of medication if, we were able to make a better connection between the anxiety, the depression, and the EMF exposure. And so those are the big ones I see, along with headaches. For some people, pain, very acute kind of stabbing pain. Some people, when it gets very extreme, I can see people have open wounds in their skin. They have this burning sensation. It can get pretty severe for a lot of people, but, those tinnitus, anxiety, insomnia, headaches, those are the biggies.
Wow. When you start talking about, not only insomnia, but anxiety, depression, irritability, these seem to be increasingly common conditions at least in the Western world. Are there any estimates for how many people experience EHS? And just before you answer that, I know that's difficult because I happen to agree with you that I think more people have these symptoms but don't recognize them as problems per se, or haven't identified the source of them. But is there any sort of working number that academics or scientists or doctors use to sort of gauge how widespread this condition is?
Yes, there is. And so according to some researchers, like Dr. Magda Havas, Deborah Davis, I've heard some estimates from them specifically, and some other researchers, and they commonly will say they think that about 3% of the population is what we would call EHS, electrohypersensitive. So that very severe, almost I'm debilitated in a high EMF environment. So about 3% of the population would be considered severely EHS. And then around 35% of the population would be considered to have more of the mild symptoms. So I guess I would not be considered severely EHS, but I would be, more in that 35% range of my symptoms are mild, but they're there and they're noticeable. But, like you just alluded to, what we don't know is how much higher that number is because of all the people that aren't making the connection between their symptoms and their environment.
Right. And you're saying that you didn't have a particularly severe case, but obviously yours was severe enough that you went out and got another degree in order to figure out how to address it. So, but for people who have it more severe, it must be a real challenge to just live day to day. And I know these are some of your clients. So could you give us and our listeners some insight into what it's like to live that way?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked that question. I don't know how many webinars and podcasts I've been on, and no one's ever asked me that, but I think it is a real testimony to your sympathy for these people, because people don't understand what it's like to live with EHS, and it's unbelievable what these people have to go through. I have many clients that can't really leave their homes. They try to maybe once a week, once a month to run some errands, but it's incredibly painful for them because you can't, if you're going to go to a grocery store or, any kind of store, you're going to be in an environment where there are a lot of cell towers. So it's very painful for them because of the exposure. It's hard for them to be in a car because a car invariably has a lot of EMFs because of the motors. Some people I know have to live in the basement, shielded basement, because the EMF levels are, from outside, from cell towers and radio frequency, is often much lower in the basement because you don't have that exposure. It's underground. I have a few clients that have to sleep in kind of like a full bodysuit. Otherwise, they won't sleep. So it's like head to toe clothing that is shielding clothing that has silver in it. I know some people that just live with the pain because they don't want to go to those kinds of extremes. So they're pretty much in a constant state of headaches and joint pain. GI disruption. It's a broad spectrum of what these people have to deal with. But it's pretty debilitating, and it doesn't create a good quality of life. So, thank you for bringing that up and raising some awareness about what these people have to deal with.
No, and thank you for helping to paint that picture. I mean, that it sounds like a prison, and the responses that these people need to take. I mean, what I'm wondering is how others in their lives interpret those actions, because I know, at least in mass media, one of the portrayals that people are most familiar with is Saul Goodman's brother in Better Call Saul, and there was this constant. No one in his life essentially believed what he was experiencing. And I have to figure someone needs to believe you if you're going to be able to get treatment and if your lifestyle is going to be accommodated. How do your clients who have these symptoms, how do others in their lives interpret and react to these sorts of lifestyle changes that they need to make?
Yeah, well, that's another great question. I would say that most people don't talk about it with their friends and family. They have to with their family because they have to make changes in their life. But with their friends, most people say, I just don't bring it up. I didn't bring it up for a while until I became certified. I was like, well, I got to talk about it now. And really, I wanted to raise awareness. And I didn't understand in the beginning that people would not believe me. I really didn't get that people would go, oh, well, you're kind of crazy. I experienced this thing. It was night and day. And I was like, hey, this happened. And I had no idea that people would look at me funny. And it is sad. A lot of times when I'm doing an assessment in a person's house, one of the spouses, it could be the husband or the wife, they will have me come when the other spouse isn't there because the other spouse is not a believer. Or I will be there and I will get some resentment from the non-believing spouse, and they kind of, I don't know, they don't let me go through the full assessment, and they may have me leave early because they feel like it's a waste of money and it's in the spouse's head, and it's more of, this is a psychological issue, not a real issue. And when I'll say that when I do walk into a person's home and both spouses are on board and they're both excited about learning about it, I am overwhelmed with happiness because it's so awesome. I mean, it's so rare to see that, but I can see that they're supporting each other. They believe each other. They're in it together and they're willing to take those steps. It's rare that happens, but it's fantastic when it does. So that just kind of, shows you that it doesn't happen often. And these people do get a lot of criticism from their friends and their family. They lose relationships. I've seen a lot of people become divorced over this. I've seen a lot of people lose friends. I've lost friends over it. So it does really take a big hit on your social life, and it just adds a whole nother layer of tragedy to what they're already experiencing.
Wow, that was pretty. That was pretty dramatic, and I appreciate you sharing that. I can imagine. I mean, just knowing how certain people in my life react to things that I say or that I'm going through or others are going through, I would imagine that let's say that there is someone with EHS and there's someone else in their life who doesn't quite believe it. I would imagine that the non-believer would be more inclined to accept the reality of the condition if the patient were able to get a formal diagnosis from a Western doctor. Am I right with that, or is that even too optimistic?
Well, I don't know. I've seen it. I think it all depends on the person. I think in some circumstances that's probably very true. In other circumstances, it's not going to be true. I mean, when I get into discussions about this via whatever, if it could, social media or on some kind of platform or in person with somebody and they don't believe me, yet I show them the scientific research, and I can point to, very sound, excellent scientific research that shows us a clear connection between the health impact and the exposure. They often will immediately tell me, oh, that's been debunked. And, that it without even looking at it. I mean, they've already made up their mind. They already know, no matter what I show them, no matter what I say to them, even if I said I had a diagnosis of EHS, which I do not, but if I were to say that, it's a non-discussion with them because they've made up their mind, and this is all in our head, and I'm a fear-mongering snake oil salesman, whatever. So we have those people, unfortunately. Even if we did have a diagnosis, they're not going to believe it. But you're right that there probably are people who will see that coming from a medical doctor, that this is an official diagnosis. They may be more responsive to that.
So I'm just going to guess here that just based on some of the stuff we were saying before, which is both you and I believe that more people have this condition than are aware that have this condition, that I'm pretty sure there are people listening to this podcast right now who are saying, oh, I wonder if that's the cause of my insomnia or ringing in my ears or both, or anxiety. What can someone like that do to see, to pursue that, to see, is this what I'm experiencing? Can it be diagnosed? Is there a medical treatment on? Well, let's start with the diagnosis, actually. So if someone thinks that they might be sensitive, what would their next step be in terms of securing a diagnosis?
Well, it's important for them to have a good relationship with a primary care provider. And this is important because the primary care provider is going to want to know your history. They're going to want to rule out any other conditions. You could have a serious medical condition that may need to be investigated. And also, I couldn't just walk into a doctor's office that I've never seen before and say, hey, I have all these symptoms. Can you give me an EHS diagnosis? And they'll say, well, I don't know anything about you. What's your history? What happened yesterday? What happened 10 years ago? So you have to develop a relationship with that primary care provider so they can really get a full picture of your health and make an appropriate diagnosis, because we do want to rule out, all possible causes. And it may be from your EMF exposure. It may be something else. It may be a combination of things. It's usually a combination of things. But first, develop that relationship. Keep a log of your symptoms or a diary of your symptoms, which can be really helpful to the medical provider. But it's also important to note that not all medical providers have any awareness of this. Some of them are not believers. Some of them are. So it's important to identify a medical practitioner that is willing and open to explore the idea and give you an appropriate diagnosis, because there are ICD international codes for this diagnosis. So it is a recognized disability in America through the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it is an official diagnosis, but that doesn't mean that all medical providers are aware of it or believe in it.
So it's a process both of building a relationship with a medical provider, which isn't always easy in the United States with insurance the way it is, and then also working to educate or encourage that medical provider to self-educate on this subject.
Right. And, providing them with research can be very helpful, but we could get into, it's a whole nother topic, but there's research on the other side, which they will often cite as their defense of this isn't actually a real thing. If somebody wants to find a medical provider that is going to be more open to this, I would seek out a naturopath or a functional medicine practitioner, because they often have a lot more awareness about this than a conventional medical doctor might.
That's great advice. So beyond that, again, keeping in mind that particularly in the United States, not everyone has such great insurance. Not everyone has insurance. Are there actions people can take to try to self-diagnose? I remember I'm recalling earlier in the conversation, you didn't know you had these sensitivities, but you turned off your Wi-Fi and you took some other actions, and you saw you got better. Are there things like that people can do to see if they might potentially have this condition?
Yes. So when I'm initially speaking with a client and they think that they're having some symptoms, but they're not quite sure, one of the first things I always ask them is, well, how do you feel when you go camping? I live in Idaho, so we got a lot of campers here, and most people, well, I shouldn't say most, a lot of people will spend time off-grid camping, sleeping in a tent. And that often will give me some great information, because the large majority of the time, the answer is, oh my gosh, I sleep great. I feel great when I'm out in the middle of nature and I'm camping. Well, that's a very big sign, right? I mean, there's of course, a lot of other environmental influences in the city and inside our homes. But if they tell me that, then I know we've got a pretty strong case that they are actually reacting to their electromagnetic environment. One thing to note, though, and I learned this last summer, I went camping and I was staying in a developed campground that had hookups for RVs and trailers. And I was there for a couple of weeks, actually. And the first week I just wasn't sleeping well. And I thought, I wonder what's going on here. So I took out my meter, and sure enough, there was very high magnetic fields from the wiring that was powering the hookups.
Wow.
And so I say that for anyone who's going to say, oh, yeah, I'm going to go camping and try this out. You really got to be off-grid completely, not rolling up to a campground that has electrical ability, because you're surrounded by wiring there. So it's really helpful if you can get like in a backpacking situation. So you're going to hike into the wilderness and sleep in a tent for a couple of days with nothing else around you, to give your body a real chance at identifying, does it feel better or not, than when it's in the city or in your home.
So this part of the conversation, by the way, has been really fantastic, Cathy. I really appreciate it. And I now want to move into more of the talk on how to address this condition. But to try to segue to that, I'm wondering because what's really interesting, and I think what's made EHS so difficult to diagnose over the years is, I mean, if everyone is reactive to exposure to electromagnetic fields, which you and I both know is true, then why are some people so much more sensitive than others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what some of the researchers have found, like I mentioned earlier, Deborah Davis and, there's so many, Ole Johansson, your father, Martin Blank, so many excellent researchers out there, Dr. Martin Paul. What a lot of them have discovered is that there's some underlying precursors or underlying conditions or previous experiences that have had some kind of trauma or some kind of influence on the body that has now made them more sensitive to the electromagnetic environment. And, it's kind of the classic analogy of, we have a rain barrel, and that when it rains, the barrel fills up. But at some point, that next drop of water, the barrel's going to overflow, because it cannot handle any more exposure. It cannot handle any more water. And so we think that this is what's happening for some of the people that are so sensitive, is they have already some kind of underlying precursor or condition, and their bucket is already so full that you now add in this electricity or radio frequency, and their body just can't handle it.
Okay, that's a really powerful metaphor. Are there? Can you explain a little bit more about the nature of these? Just give a few examples. The nature of these precursors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's several, and one of them would be physical trauma. And I have actually quite a few clients who have had some kind of brain injury. One of my mentors in the building biology, he was knocked on the head. He was an engineer, and he got knocked on the head with I forget what it was, a tool or something, and he suffered a concussion. And immediately after that, he became sensitive, very, very sensitive. I have another client who was pushed and fell back and hit her head and became sensitive after that. So this physical trauma that can disrupt the nervous system can be pretty impactful. It could also be emotional trauma, and that's extremely common. I have several clients that have gone through some pretty severe emotionally traumatic events in their lives, loss of loved ones or loss of family members, divorces, things like that have triggered their sensitivity as well. There's also underlying infections, things like Lyme disease, very big. A mold exposure. I can't tell you how many of my clients, probably the large majority of my clients who are sensitive to EMFs have had a mold exposure at some point in their lives. That can really disrupt the nervous system. Other infections like parasites or bacterial overgrowths or chronic viruses or viral conditions can make you more sensitive. There's also genetic predispositions. So there's certain genetic SNPs, as we call them, that will make you more susceptible and more sensitive to your exposure. Chemical exposure is another really big one. So if you are chemically sensitive, you're almost always hypersensitive as well. So if you've had a big chemical exposure, EMF is going to be more severe for you. Let's see. Those are the big ones. I may be missing a few, but those are the biggies.
No, that's really helpful. And if we had more time, I think we could do a whole episode just on the precursors. But I'd like to try to transition here to talking about how you address this, because you work with clients all the time. And my understanding is that you are a big proponent of working to build resilience through nutrition, is physiological resilience through nutrition. Is that a fair statement? Is that how you see it?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's huge because it's just like you can't eat McDonald's every day and expect to lose weight and feel great, right? You can't have a poor diet and expect to feel well. And, as nutrition was kind of my first passion, I'm really rooted in that because it's those chemicals that we get from our food that help our body function appropriately. So if we don't give it enough B vitamins, if we don't give it enough calcium, if we don't give it enough magnesium, etc., then we're going to feel awful, and everything else that we're exposed to is going to have that much more of an impact. So it's really important in my mind, not only to remove the sources of the EMFs, but to improve the way the body functions so that when it is in an EMF environment, it can have less symptoms and recover quicker from that exposure.
That's a really good point. And I'd like to just quickly go in a little more depth on that. So when you're working with a client, and I know that your services go beyond nutrition, that you also work, you and I both spend a lot of time on EMF mitigation. But here I'm talking specifically about the nutrition aspect of your regimen. When you do that, is your goal to quote unquote cure EHS, or is it more about building a person's resilience to sort of raise that bar so that where symptoms start to appear? Like, is EHS curable from your perspective?
Well, the use of the word cure or curable is a tricky one. I don't know that I would use that word. We can absolutely take someone who has severe symptoms and get them to a place where they don't react almost at all, or they react 90% less than they used to. I don't think I would ever say that anyone is cured, because we do still have that biological effect, that cellular effect of the voltage-gated calcium channels, which we can get into if you want. But that is happening no matter what. So we can't cure that, but we can make the person much, much less reactive and have a whole lot less symptoms than they already may be having if we can get the body to function appropriately and learn how to handle those exposures better.
No, that's a great distinction. I appreciate you pointing that out. So building resilience isn't a cure. It's sort of, and correct me if I'm painting this the wrong way, but it's building your strength. So you're not curing anything. You're making someone and their body stronger to react to these forces that they're exposed to.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I mentioned the physical and emotional trauma earlier, and a lot of what's happening with people who are reacting and having symptoms is that their nervous system is just, it's over responding, and it feels like it is still in this fight or flight mode, or that it's still threatened. So every little exposure, be it a chemical or a mold spore or an electric field, their body's saying danger, danger, danger. And it's heightening its responses, and it's intentionally giving the body more pain so that so that you remove yourself from the situation. But it's kind of doing that artificially. It's doing it in a hyper aware state, because it feels like it's still in danger from whatever this, physical or mental trauma that it had. So the body can never really get out of the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight mode, into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest, or the calm, relaxed mode. So that's one reason why they're having these responses. So if we can get the nervous system to relax, and we can let the body know that it's not in as much danger as it may think, then we can reduce a lot of the symptoms, because we're, quote unquote, strengthening the body's nervous system, which can go a long way to help people.
So earlier you mentioned this very long, and I feel a little intimidating phrase, voltagegated calcium channels. And I don't want to go too in depth on that, but I know that's some of the nutrition information that we're going to get to is sort of based off of the scientific knowledge that I believe Dr. Paul has established on this topic. And so I'm wondering if you could spend a few words to explain to our listeners, again, as simply as possible, what these voltagegated calcium channels, sorry, I said it wrong again, voltagegated calcium channels, or VGCCs, are, and why it's relevant to what we're discussing today.
Yeah, that's a mouthful. So basically, your cell will have minerals on the outside, and it'll have minerals on the inside. And calcium, most of the calcium in our body is on the outside of the cell. And we only want small amounts to get inside the cell, because, calcium is excitatory. And so these voltage gates that are on the cell membrane are there intentionally to allow a certain amount in, but not too much. And it works great. And so for most people, those voltage gates work very well. But as the name implies, it is influenced by voltage, which is electricity. It is electrons moving, which is how our body functions. So when we are in the presence of non-native or human-made voltage, or the wiring in our walls, or radio frequency, or whatever it is, these gates can be artificially opened, which means that too much calcium, can flood into the cell. And that creates this downstream effect of oxidative stress. And what happens when we have oxidative stress? Well, any of the symptoms I've already mentioned, and most of our chronic health conditions today, all have a basis in oxidative stress. So that is how we are impacted on a cellular level by our exposure to these fields.
Okay, thank you. That was very clear. I appreciate that. So you mentioned oxidative stress. is this the type of body stress that antioxidants are able to help us address?
That is exactly right. You have your nutrition knowledge well dialed in. Yes, so antioxidants will help us to combat our free radicals or our oxidative stress. And so where do we get antioxidants? Well, we get them in mostly from our produce, from fruits and vegetables. And that's why as nutritionists, we're always telling people to eat their fruits and vegetables. And we like to especially focus on those deeply pigmented fruits and vegetables like plums or eggplant or dark leafy greens. Those rich, deep pigments, blueberries, they have some of the highest antioxidant capacity. So as long as we get some of that in with each meal, we can help to offset some of the oxidative stress that we're getting from multiple exposures in our lives.
Okay, so deeply pigmented fruits and veggies. Is there a sort of a recommended amount? I mean, I know everyone is different. Their situations are different. Their physiologies are different. But are there certain, like if someone was trying to set a benchmark for themselves, how much of this should I eat a day?
Oh boy. Well, that gets into a whole other area, and I'll try not to go too far down that rabbit hole. But I have actually seen a lot of people make themselves ill from just cramming a blender with kale and spinach and as much dark leafy greens as they can into their blender every day. And then they're drinking this big old smoothie with all these vegetables. I don't recommend that. That's not really a good idea for multiple reasons. There are other things in these vegetables that can cause problems for people, like oxalates is a big one, or various other plant compounds. So we want to be reasonable. If you have a serving or two of vegetables at each meal is typically what I recommend. I like to fill my plate half full with vegetables, and then I have a palm-sized portion of protein and then a small amount of carbs depending on my energy needs. But that half of your plate of vegetables is not nearly as much as a lot of people may think. I mean, if you have a small side salad, that will easily meet that requirement. If you have, a couple pieces of broccoli and half of a cooked carrot or a full cooked carrot, that will easily meet that requirement. So I don't want people to go overboard with this. But just, 1 or 2 servings, half your plate of vegetables at each meal, and maybe a snack of a small low sugar fruit here and there, and you're done.
That's great. So, and when you say each meal, you're talking about lunch and dinner, or are you talking about vegetables at breakfast too? I'm just in terms of quantity.
You can have that. Well, you can definitely have vegetables at breakfast, but in my world, a lot of people are intermittent fasting, so they're only eating maybe 2 meals a day.
Okay.
And some people that's great for, some people maybe not appropriate. So if you are eating breakfast, I definitely recommend some vegetables in there. And I count spices as a very rich source of antioxidants. So if you're going to have some eggs, let's say, and some bacon, you want to throw in some, turmeric or rosemary, cumin. Those are all really great for protecting against EMF exposure, and, a side of broccoli. I mean, that's totally doable for most people.
That's really, I hadn't even thought of spices as it makes perfect sense because it comes from produce, but I hadn't even thought of spices as a source of antioxidants. So that survives the process of drying them out and pulverizing them and so forth.
Yes. Yes.
So I know you also talk about blood sugar levels. Is that related to the antioxidants, or is that separate? How do blood sugar levels relate to physiological resilience that we've been talking about?
Oh, well, I love this conversation. Whenever I'm working with a client on their nutrition or their health in general, I always start with blood sugar. No matter what their health problem is, we must first stabilize the blood sugar. So, I don't necessarily care yet about what you're eating, but I need to know when and how much, and are your macronutrients balanced? Because if your blood sugar is out of balance, as most people's are because we're eating a standard American diet, that means that we're going to have these hormone fluctuations all day long. And our cortisol is going to go way up and it's going to go way down, and our insulin goes way up. And then we get this blood sugar crash, which raises our cortisol, and it affects our entire hormone system. And this just sets us up for just all kinds of problems. Because, our hormones pretty much regulate all the systems of our body. So when our hormones are out of balance, we're again going to be in this heightened stress response situation. And so our nervous system is going to be altered. And, I'm sure we've all heard that when you've got high amounts of stress, it has dramatic impact on your physiology. And that's where a lot of our chronic health symptoms begin, along with the oxidative stress. So we must get the blood sugar dialed in so that we can have a better hormone balance so that the body can function. Otherwise, it's constantly in this fight or flight stressful response, and it's never going to be able to function as it's intended to.
So not everyone can get fresh berries or eggplant, all the time, depending on where they live. So I imagine that a lot of people must ask you about supplements. And I think you actually got a little into this earlier because, for instance, I've recently started on turmeric supplements. So I guess some of these things are directly available as supplements, but can supplements help? And are there particular ones that you recommend to people?
Yes, definitely. So, I have a lot of people in my world, be it a practitioner or clients, that say, well, I get everything I need from my food. And I really wish that was accurate. And 100 years ago, it may have been. But today, our soil is so depleted and our food travels so far that the nutrients in our food is dramatically less than what it used to be. So most of us can benefit from some supplementation. Now, not all supplements are appropriate for every person, so you got to make sure that you're working with a practitioner that can guide you to the appropriate ones. But some of the supplements that I like the best, specifically for helping our bodies be more resilient against certain EMF protection, include things like glutathione, which is the body's main antioxidant. We produce it, but some of us need a little extra support in that. Vitamin C is excellent. It's an antioxidant as well. Astaxanthin is one that I like a lot, especially if you're going to be in a high EMF environment, like if you're flying. Astaxanthin comes from things like shrimp, shellfish, that bright red color that you see on like a shellfish or a lobster. That's astaxanthin. It can be very protective. Rosemary tincture is one of my favorites. When people are flying or you're going to get into a car for a road trip or you're in a high EMF environment, rosemary tincture is excellent. Gosh, there's so many. Lion's mane mushroom is another one of my favorites because it's really helpful for the nervous system. And melatonin, that's the last one I'll say. And melatonin is also a great one to help combat all of our exposure.
That's a really full list, and we'll make sure to add that information to the show notes. Before moving on, though, and you've said this one before, and it always piques my interest. Can you talk a little bit about melatonin? And because I know a lot of people take melatonin and its role in helping to build resilience against EMF.
Well, melatonin is also one of our main antioxidants in the body, and most people know melatonin because it's a hormone, and it's the sleep hormone, and it's what makes you sleepy at night, which is true, but it's also a very potent antioxidant. So there is some controversy about taking melatonin regularly and whether or not you should do that, because some people think that it creates a negative feedback loop, which means that if you take it exogenously, then your body's going to be, it's going to kind of get lazy and not continue to produce it on its own. I've seen research to support that a little bit, but I've also seen research on the other side that says that doesn't necessarily happen. So I am a little bit cautious with its use. However, I've started to recommend it more often because we are all exposed to high levels of EMFs almost all the time. And so, unfortunately, for some of us, it's just something that we could take ongoingly because of our high exposures. I'm not happy about that. I wish we could let the body do what it needs to do on its own. But because we have this large exposure, for many of us, it can be helpful to take it ongoing. Of course, I don't want anybody to take anything that I'm mentioning without talking to their health provider first about it. But melatonin is something that I take often because of these reasons, because of our high exposure, and I want that extra antioxidant support. But I'm also doing a lot to encourage my body's own release of melatonin at night by blocking blue light or artificial light at night and getting good early morning sunlight, which kind of resets our circadian rhythm. So it is a little bit of a controversial topic, but I do think that it is becoming more needed as we increase our EMF exposure.
So, Cathy, as you know, I really love focusing on not only explaining subjects to people, which I think you've done a fantastic job of today, but also then giving them some tangible action items, something that my listeners could start doing right now with relatively little effort or expense. Could you please highlight 3 changes related to nutrition, so I suppose related to diet, that people could take right now, right after this podcast is over, to help build up their resilience against damage from EMF?
Yes, what a fun question. So first, I would say balancing your blood sugar, really important. And like I said, all you got to do to start doing this is make sure that your macronutrients, meaning your fat, protein, and carbohydrates, making sure that those 3 are balanced at each meal. So each meal you have a protein. That could be a grass-fed meat, pasture-based eggs, wild-caught fish, a high-quality plant source if it doesn't have a high carbohydrate content. So you have that protein, and then you have a small amount of carbohydrates. You may need less or more than other people. I like to start with half a cup. And that could be something like a half a cup of sweet potato or plantain or maybe some brown rice or some properly prepared beans or legumes. And then you've got half of your plate is vegetables. And somewhere in there, you've got a couple tablespoons of fat. Maybe you've got butter on your sweet potato or something like that. If you plan every meal that way, it is going to go a long way in helping you balance your blood sugar. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is open up that spice cabinet and use your spices. Use them liberally. Don't be afraid to add cumin and rosemary and paprika, turmeric, all of these beautiful spices, ginger, nutmeg, cinnamon. These are all very, very antioxidant rich, and you can add them into most of your foods. I would say if you haven't opened one of your spice jars in like 2 years, it's probably time to get a new jar. They don't last forever. The antioxidant content will wear off over time. So nice new fresh herbs. That would be a really good way to boost your nutrition. And then lastly, gosh, you're going to do so much with just those 2 tips right there. But I really like to focus on quality of my food. I'm more concerned about the quality than the quantity. So if you're gonna, buy all of these beautiful foods, do your best to get organic, because we want to reduce our chemical exposure again. So if you can get as much as you can organic, and I realize that that's not doable for everybody, a good resource to use for this is the Environmental Working Group website. Every year they come out with a list called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And so that shows you the top 12 foods that have the highest pesticide and herbicide residues. And so you want to always make sure you get organic for those. And then there's the Clean 15, which is the produce that, even though it's conventionally raised, it has not too high levels of pesticides and herbicides. So those you can get conventionally. So you can save a little bit of money there. But whenever you can really focus on quality ingredients, know where it's coming from, if you can know your farmer, awesome. Organic whenever possible, local whenever possible, that will really go a long way with your health.
Thank you, Cathy. That was really a fantastic list, and I know my listeners appreciate it, and we'll also put that in the show notes. As many of our listeners know, you and I do a lot of work together at SYB, but you also have your own consulting, and if you could maybe take a minute to tell our listeners about the work you do through wholehomeandbodyhealth.com.
Sure, yeah. So I function both as a building biologist and a nutritionist. So I do assessments, in-home assessments for both air quality, things like mold and chemicals, as well as EMF assessments. And then I also work with people virtually through my complete wellness program. And that is a 6 to 8 month program. It involves 10 individual one-on-one sessions with my client. And we go through everything from their entire health history. We fine-tune their diet. We may run some functional medicine labs if that's necessary. I usually have them get a meter. A lot of times they have an EMF meter. And we do a full assessment on their house. As it's virtual, I walk them through it. We cover air quality, and we talk about the air quality in their home. We just go through the entire spectrum of their health and try to, really improve their environment, as well as try to figure out, do they have one of these precursors? What's going on for them that is causing some health challenges? And I dig really deep in trying to find the underlying reason why they're still having health challenges. And, a lot of times it's the EMF, a lot of times it's maybe we find mold. But a lot of times when we clean up their diet, we supplement appropriately, we may run a few labs and discover, kind of an infection or something that we address or whatever it is. And then over the course of this 6 to 8 months, however long those 10 sessions take, oh my gosh, we see dramatic improvements. It's so rewarding for me to, start working with a client who is just at the end of the rope and just feeling hopeless. And then 6, 8, 10 months later, they're a totally new person because they've done the hard work of remediating their EMF, finding their chemical exposures, fine-tuning their diet, addressing their precursors. It's awesome. It's just, I love it so much. Just to see people get better, it's fantastic.
No, that's really fantastic. And what I love about the information that you've shared today is how eye-opening it is to realize that there are things that we can do to control how EMF exposure affects us. Now, you and I, right, we spend a lot of time both together and in our separate businesses. We're constantly advocating ways that people can reduce their exposure. But the information that you've generously shared today with my audience helps us all understand that there are other levers you can pull to reduce the damage and to boost your resilience and to live healthier. And for me, it's certainly been eye-opening, and I know my listeners are going to appreciate it. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Cathy.
Well, thank you, R. I'm so excited about the new podcast. I'm really honored to be a guest here, and thanks so much for what you do and raising awareness about this very important topic.
As always, I'm joined by my right-hand lady and operations manager at Shield Your Body, Stephanie. Stephanie, our listeners might not know this, but you actually work with Cathy here at SYB, and I know you've also attended several of her webinars. Given that background, what did you think of my interview with her?
Well, first of all, Cathy's a rock star. She's a rock star, and I really appreciate all the work she does with SYB and all the work she does trying to help people, live healthier lives. The interview was great, and it was super informative, and I I'm really happy to introduce her to more and more people because she's really amazing.
Yeah, no, I total agreement there. So in terms of the things that the top things I feel I learned in that interview,
Mm-hmm.
one, I really like her focus on building physiological resistance and resilience. When it comes to damage from EMF exposure, right? It's not about curing it. That's not the approach. That's not the framing. It's about making us stronger. It's about making us more resilient. And I find that to be a really powerful framing and perspective. And it's a different way of thinking about this serious health issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I was sitting there taking notes. What things should I be focusing on as far as health go, or as far as nutrition goes? Because I really hadn't given a lot of credence to. Oh yeah, like every health issue, what we put in our bodies also has an effect. So making sure we eat, use lots of spices and aromatics. Well, anyways, we use a lot of spices in our dishes. It's just not something I had thought about other than, spices and herbs make food taste great. But now it's like
Yeah.
this added reason to use it.
Yeah, no, actually that was
Mm-hmm.
my top third takeaway was I love her focus on spices.
Yes.
You can never cook with too many spices, in my opinion. And so more turmeric, it is
Yeah.
for me here at the Blank House. So then that was the third, but now the third. I found her portrayal of electrosensitivity. I thought that discussion, it turned into something much more powerful than I had anticipated.
Yeah.
A lot of people who don't have EHS have trouble understanding just what it's like. And I fortunately don't have that level of sensitivity, but through my work at Shield Your Body, I talk to a lot of people who do. And for those people to find everyday environments so poisonous, it's a challenge that other people just don't understand. And I thought how she explained it was really sensitive, it was really aware, and it was really illuminating.
Yeah. That might, there were a lot of takeaways from this amazing interview, but that really struck an emotional chord with me. Because again, our work at Shield Your Body, I deal with, I'm constantly interacting with customers and audience members who are just learning about EMF. And a common thing that I hear, and I'm sure you do too, or I know you do too, is we get these emails from people who are just desperate because they're in so much discomfort. And I really appreciate Cathy taking the time to be vulnerable and to express, her journey through, dealing with physical discomfort due to EMF, and how how that motivated her to get deeper into the subject. But and my hope is that people who may be listening to this who struggle with EHS feel less alone and feel some hope, but also for the people who maybe don't understand what living with discomfort like this and pain in some situations must be like, because it's devastating and very challenging for people. And I feel like the representations that we see in the media of people suffering from EHS is in a mocking way. And it's not funny. And I don't, it's important that we recognize that these things are real and that people are suffering. And I hope that that part of the conversation elevates the conversation around EHS so that we're a little more empathetic in our dialogue and even media representations. What do you think are?
No, I agree. The more conversations like this
Mm-hmm.
that happen and that people hear and have access to, I think it does help build out a better dialogue, a better way of understand. Because we didn't get too far into the statistics here, but I really do believe, I think it's almost certain that this condition is going to spread because the amount of EMF in the environment just keeps exploding. And when I say exploding, I mean exponential growth year after year with all of the new towers, with all of the new smart tech, and with the absence of real safety regulations. More and more people are going to be exposed to levels that trigger these types of responses. And they may not even be as severe as the ones that like Cathy and I were talking about, but they're real. And I think discussions like this really help move that forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to add one thing too that I was that kind of popped into my mind when listening to the interview is that not only are people going to feel more symptoms because we have so many higher frequencies and so many more gadgets, wireless gadgets, but also what's starting to hit home is there are precursors and there are other things that can trigger your sensitivity, including Lyme disease. So as the toxins in our environment become more problematic, or underlying diseases like Lyme disease, spread and become increasingly problematic, I think that's also we're also going to see a lot more of the population experiencing these types of sensitivities, and I'd really like to see EHS become something that people like health practitioners kind of include into the spectrum of health.
I think that was actually some really good insight there, right? Because Cathy did talk about precursors, and what that really means is that there are certain conditions that you have that make you more susceptible to other conditions. And I remember you and I talked about this in episode number 1, my view on toxins, that we live in a world full of toxins and more toxins. It's toxicity keeps growing. And so the point that you just made, I think it's really important that, because I was saying more people are going to experience EHS because there's more and more EMF in the environment, but that was perhaps too narrow a perspective, because really there's more and more toxins in the environment of multiple types. And these all create susceptibilities to other toxins. So the more of one toxin you're exposed to can reduce your resilience to another toxin. And I think that was a really good point, Stephanie. So thank you for
articulating that and framing it a little bit more, because I think it's a really important point. And like I was trying to articulate too, this thought of, more practitioners need to include this into the health spectrum. I think that's an important goal as we, raise awareness to EMF. Practitioners need to know that
totally
this
agree.
could be a symptom, or, this could be causing a part of a symptom.
So for all of our audience members out there, if you know health practitioners, please share this episode with them so they can hear directly from an expert with direct experience in this area. Learn more about this really important condition. So as a reminder, everyone can learn more about Cathy at wholehomeandbodyhealth.com. And don't forget, you can book consulting time with her from anywhere over your computer through shieldyourbody.com. That's shieldYourBody, all one word.com. And use promo code POD to save 15% on your session. Both links are going to be in the show notes. If you like this show and want to hear more, please remember to subscribe to this podcast, the Healthier Tech Podcast, available on all major podcasting platforms. And if you have a moment, please also leave a review. Reviews are critical to help more people find this podcast and learn about the important and undercovered topics that we cover. And you can also learn more and sign up for our mailing list to get notified when we have new interviews, webinars, ebooks, and sales at shieldYourBody.com. That's shieldYourBody, all one word.com. You can also just click that link in the show notes. Until next time, I'm R. Blank, and I want to thank you so much for tuning into the Healthier Tech Podcast. And always remember to shield your body.